since the very beginning, 1981. So, right, here we go. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, probably this was the biggest case that I certainly partook in. And it was the case that took me off the proverbial skeptical fence. I was only a young ufologist at the time. You know, I was that was in 1979. I think I was about 21 or something like that. And the reason I came to learn about it was on the radio, and I knew straight away I just had to get involved with this case. So I spoke to one of the persons on the radio station, and incredibly, they gave me the phone number for Robert Taylor's house, which technically they shouldn't be doing. Cutting a long story short, myself and my colleague travelled up to Dechmont, which is near Livingston, a small town near Edinburgh in central Scotland. And once we appeared in Bob Taylor's, that's a witness, Bob Taylor, once we appeared in his living room was awash with press reporters and media people, radio guys, TV guys. And he knew I was coming, and he says, "Are you Malcolm?" I says, "Yeah." He says, "Right, I'm only going to speak to you because you seem to know what you're talking about. All these other people just want a story, you know," which I felt was great. So he proceeded to tell me all about his wonderful tale, which I'll explain to your good self and the viewers and listeners shortly. And later on that afternoon, myself and my colleague went up to Dechmont Woods. We eventually found a location, and snow had fell that previous night. So at the site was a fellow paranormal researcher by the name of Andrew Collins, who I'm sure all at ASSAP are well aware of, and another chap called Martin Keepman. And so the story itself was that 61-year-old Robert Taylor was employed by the Livingston Development Corporation in the forestry department. He was a foreman forester. Now, you've got to understand that Bob fought over in France. He went over to France on D-Day 5. He was in a tank regiment, and he actually helped liberate Bergen-Belsen. He was one of the first tanks that went into Belsen. And the sights he saw was, well, we all know it was terrific and horrendous. After the war, he worked for the Livingston Development Corporation, as I say, in the forestry department. So he had no airs and graces. He had no interest at all, Christian, in matters relating to UFOs or ghosts or poltergeists. He just was a normal guy who wanted just to have his pint down the bowling club, play his bowls, take his pay packet home to his wife, and just generally enjoy life. All that changed. All that changed on the morning of November the 9th, 1979. When he went up to Dechmont Woods in his pickup truck. He was accompanied on this journey by his Irish red setter dog, Lara. They came to a point in the woods where they had to get off, so they alighted from the vehicle. They walked down this forestry ride, this forestry path, and it was bordered by, you know, big tall trees on either side, and it led out into a clearing about between 40 and 60 feet. It was like a square patch, a big clearing. And he was absolutely gobsmacked. He couldn't believe what he was looking at. For there, hovering about 20, 30, 40 feet above the surface of the grass, was a large dome-shaped craft. And he's standing looking at this in disbelief. He couldn't understand what he's looking at. He's never saw anything like this in his life before. And his dog started to bark furiously at this thing. And he said, "Malcolm," he says, "parts of it seemed to disappear. You could see the young trees in the background, and then it would solidify again, then dematerialize again." And he said it had a flange going around this big ball-like machine, and coming up from the flange was these cross-like projections. Now, what purpose that served, we don't know. Now, as if the story couldn't get even more stranger, it did. For suddenly, what resembles, and I think you may have some slides coming up there, Christian, what resembled two Second World War sea mines. If you go on to the next one, that's it, disappearing, that's it. Two of those descended from beneath this object. They impacted onto the grass, and they started rolling across the grass towards him, making a kind of sucking or a plopping noise. They stopped and they projected these rod-like projections that you're looking at on screen towards his very person, attaching these rods at each side of his trousers, and pulled him very, very forcibly towards this larger object that you're looking at on screen. And just before he lost consciousness, which he did, he remembers a horrible, burning, pungent smell pervading the whole area, and then a swishing sound, as if you had a cane and you swished it through the air. Then bang, he lost consciousness. When he regained consciousness, I don't know if you've got the next slide of the marks in the grass there, Christian. When he regained consciousness, thankfully, the larger object was gone, the smaller mine-like objects were gone, and there were over 40 holes and track-like marks, impressions in the grass, which clearly were not there prior, because he had inspected the woods the day before. Nothing was in that area. He found that he had a terrible headache. He had a nasty graze under his chin and a nasty graze on his forehead. His jersey was muddy, as he was laying prone on the ground, and his trousers were ripped, which we'll come to in a moment. And skeptics have quite rightly said, well, wait a minute, Malcolm, couldn't these marks in the grass be made by his dog? Its master is lying unconscious on the forest floor, and maybe it's moving around the grass, making all these holes and impressions. Absolutely, of course it could. I've been researching UFOs and paranormal phenomena for over 40 years now. And you know what? I'm still skeptical of certain events. In any case, same as ASSAP, any case one goes into, you've got to have that skeptical hat on. No matter how impressive the evidence is, you've got to have that on. And even though I do believe in life after death, evidence for me personally is incredible. And the same applies to UFOs. I do feel we're dealing with some form of non-human intelligence. It's probably always been with us, but we'll cover that maybe later. So what happened next was that he regained consciousness. He struggled back to his pickup truck, and he grabbed the microphone to try and radio base to say that, something bizarre has happened. He couldn't speak. He couldn't speak. His voice was all dry. So he jumped in the pickup truck. He tried to get out of the forest, but he ended up reversing the back wheels of the truck into a little low-lying ditch. So the wheels are spinning. It was going nowhere, Christian, So he staggered out the truck. He staggered back to his home in Deans, which is a small village near, it's in the Dechmont area. And his wife, when she saw him, she went, what's happened to you? Because she's looking at her husband. He's all disheveled. His trousers are muddy. His trousers are ripped. And he said these immortal words, and I'll just say it as it is. He said, I've been attacked. You've what? I've been attacked. Attacked by you. And he went on to say, I've been attacked by a spaceship. And she says, look, come inside. There's no such thing as a spaceship, And he kept going on about this burning smell. Now, she knew her husband, like all, husbands and wives. After you spend many, many years together, you know your husband or your wife. And she went, nah, he's telling the truth. He's telling the truth, whatever that truth may be. So she decided to get in touch with the local doctor. The local doctor attended the family dwelling. He inspected Robert Taylor. His heart was racing still. He saw the nasty graze under his chin and on his forehead. And he said that, look, I think we need to take you to the local hospital just to get you checked over. So they took him to Bangor Hospital, and they waited and he waited. He waited and he waited. He got fed up waiting. He waited over 2 hours, Christian. Nobody came near him, so he discharged himself. And so basically what happened after that was that he still told his tale. He still said it as it was. And today stands the test of time as one of Scotland's most alluring mysteries. Just one thing about the trousers. And I've interviewed all the police officers that were there at the time, and they started to poo-poo it at first, but some of them knew Bob. Some of them knew Robert Taylor, and they knew he wouldn't concoct a story of this nature. And so we sent the trousers off for a forensic analysis in Edinburgh. And a chap called Lester Knibb, the chief forensic scientist, inspected the ripped trousers, and it was his contention. He said that these trousers were ripped by a mechanical means in a upwards motion. And these trousers were not ripped by any forest debris or twigs or sharp stones in the forest floor. They were quite clearly, pulled in an upwards manner. And in 1993, my society, Strange Phenomena Investigations, we erected a cairn with a plaque at the site. Then a couple of years ago, I fought with the West Lothian Council to get some signage up at Dechmont Woods. As we know, we have signage in Rendlesham Forest. Now, people were coming from all over the world to visit Dechmont Woods, but they couldn't find it. They could not find this area. So I've managed to get signage up there now, and waymarker posts. In fact, if you go on to the next slide, we'll see where we go with that, Christian. That's part of the signage, yeah. That's at the start of the trail. That is one of the many signage boards that we have there. If you go on to the next one. Oh yes, on the left is just saying West Lothian Council UFO Trail. The photograph on the right is a sketch done by, it may have been the police, of the indentations, the marks that were in the grass. And you can see they went down to a depth of 5 centimeters. They were at an angle. And we reckon that these marks themselves were made by these spiky balls as they rolled from side to side and then stopped in front of Robert Taylor. And you got another slide there? Yeah, well, that's just a plug for the book on the incident. It says so much more. I mean, everything's in there. And it's just an incredible case. And of course, in the book, there are about 11 different theories to possibly explain that encounter. Because as a researcher and an author, it's not one-sided with me. I've got to balance it out. I've got to, put the other side of the coin. A Scottish researcher by the name of Stuart Campbell initially said that it was black ball lightning. He revised that and said it was a Mirage of Venus. Yes, you heard right. That's what he said. We have a guy called Duncan Lunan who said it was like maybe a wheelbarrow bomb device, a machine that they used in Northern Ireland. Also an anti-tank helicopter that the military use. We've had probably the best one is Atropa belladonna. Now, this is a poisonous berry that you can find in certain woodland. But Robert he was a seasoned guy who knew these woods well. And if he would never go near poisonous berries. But what this chap, David Slater, said that he either ate them or rubbed them together in his hands, and the juices went into his skin and created this this mini stroke, for want of a better word. So we've also have theories like tectonic strain, the movement of the Earth's crust, and creates this ball of plasma light, which has been noticed and observed in Hesdalen in Sweden. And somebody said that maybe he just walked into this ball of plasma light that induced an epileptic fit, etc. So there's quite a number of solutions to possibly explain that. The bottom line for me, Christian, is having met Robert, having interviewed him, he is the salt of the earth. He was telling it as it is, absolutely, totally convinced that he saw something probably not of this world. Now, what was it doing there? Did he walk into it at the right time, or was he there at the wrong time? It's just one of these crazy cases.
It is an incredible case, isn't it? And I'm sure there'll be loads of questions about this one. But what we'll do is we'll continue, and then at the end, I will try and ask you a few questions, and we'll go through. If anyone's got a question they'd like to ask Malcolm, his book on this subject is absolutely magisterial. That was the word I used to describe it, because it not only does he give all the positive evidence, he also gives all of the case against, such as the water tower and all the other arguments that have been made. That's on the other side of the motorway, though, isn't it? So he'd have had to have crossed the bridge. But there are so many things plus and against, and in fact, you read the evidence in so much detail that at times you think, I'm sure, have I read this bit before? No, but no, it's because every TV, every newspaper story is covered. And you can see the full development of the case. I think it's the best. I don't think there has ever been another UFO case that has been investigated in so much depth as Malcolm's coverage of this one. Anyway, let's move on and we'll come back to questions on that bit. So, next up is...
the A70 incident. Yes, this is another major case. And I've got a book coming out about that in a couple of months' time, all being well. Effectively, what happened here was that two gentlemen from Edinburgh, Gary Wood and Colin Wright, both good friends, were driving from Edinburgh to a small village called Tarbrax, which was away out in the sticks. Now, again, both men had no interest in UFOs, nothing further from the truth. You know, we've all heard about UFOs in the television, the radio, and the newspapers. That was only there where they got their information, but they didn't search for it. You know, they had no main interest in it. Anyway, on August evening, way back in 1992, they were taking a satellite system down to some friends in the small village of Tarbrax. And as they leave the built-up city of Edinburgh, after a short while, they're out into farmland. You know, there are fields on either side, very desolate, little cottage there, a little reservoir there. They've got the radio on, they're talking about the day's events, and then suddenly Colin, who was in the passenger seat, looked through the windscreen of the car and went, "What the bloody hell is that?" And Gary looked at this object that you're looking on screen, because it was about 30 feet in width. It was like a three-tiered jet black, inky, oily kind of shaped or colour object. They knew straight away that this wasn't a conventional helicopter. It wasn't a conventional aircraft of any description. So what do? Do we stop the car and go back, or do we continue the journey? They decided to continue their journey. And as the car was directly underneath this hovering object, it emitted like a silver shimmering curtain of mist, a sparkling misty effect that fell from the underside of this object and bang, hit the car. As soon as that effect hit the car, both men were catapulted into total and inky blackness. They couldn't see their hands in front of their face. They couldn't see each other. They couldn't see the dashboard of the car. They thought that maybe they're dead. Are we dead? Now, seconds later, we're not obviously entirely sure how many minutes. Well, actually we are, and we'll come to that. Thankfully, they regained their sight, but the car was shuddering violently on the road. They were on the wrong side of the road. And thankfully, this is just one of these very small B roads out in the wilderness, you know. And they managed to gain control of the car, kept it back onto the left-hand side of the road, drove to their destination of Tarbrax, and they knocked on the people's door. And the lady came out, she says, "Where have you been? Where have you been? What time do you call this?" "What do you mean?" "You're an hour and a half late." Now, Christian, the journey, which they've done before, should only have taken around about 30 or 35 minutes, and they're well over an hour and a half later. So they pushed in the door and they proceeded to tell Katrina and Ian, that's the occupants of the house, exactly what they had observed on above the road. So that night and similar nights thereafter, they had strange dreams of these small grey creatures coming into their dream world. And I'm quite sure members of ASSAP know full well that in the main, these are roughly about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, childlike bodies, large inky almond-shaped eyes with pear-shaped heads. These were coming into their dream world. And then they found scars on their bodies that they knew were not there before, because we all have a bath, we go into the shower, we know our bodies, and suddenly, whoa, what's this? Fresh looking scars. So Gary, and I'm cutting a long story short here, Gary, who was the driver of the car that night, he says, well, what do you do? I mean, where do you go to with these stories? Do you go to the police? Do you go to the fire department? What do you do? And he decided to go to his local library, and he picked out a book by Jenny Randalls, and a famous authoress from here in the UK. And at the end of Jenny's books was a list of addresses, and the only Scottish one there was my address. And to cut a long story short, he contacted me. I stayed in the town of Alloa in Tullibody in Clackmannanshire. And I listened to his story, and both him and Colin, who was in the passenger seat that night, came out to see me. They proceeded to tell me the story of just seeing that alone. And I said to the guys, gentlemen, would you be interested in going under hypnotic regression just to see if perhaps something else may have transpired that night? Both men said, Malcolm, we'll do anything, because we're getting ridiculed. People are laughing at us. We need to know what went on. And I said, well, listen, it might not be the best thing for you, to be honest with you. Why is that? Because people can lie under hypnosis. You can please the hypnotherapist. You may dredge up something you've read as a young child. I think it's like cryptonesia or something like that. He says, well, look, we're happy to try it, Malcolm. So we used a professional qualified hypnotherapist. I don't know what slide you've got next there, Christian. You got the next slide there? Okay, we'll come back to that one. So we used a qualified hypnotherapist, and she took each man individually back to that evening of August 1992. But obviously she went further back at the start. She took them up when he was a small boy, etc., etc. Now, under hypnosis, a typical abduction scenario unfolded, similar to the tales that you and I and the members of this Zoom tonight are aware of. So what I'm about to say is what transpired under hypnosis. They claim that the car was stopped on the road. When that sparkling effect hit the car, it was stopped on the road. Sounds extravagant, it sounds bizarre what I'm about to relate to you, but you know, this is testimony coming from the witness. So they were approached by several small grey beings. They were taken forcibly out of the car and taken on board, presumably, this UFO, call it what you will. Both men individually were taken to different parts of this flying saucer. They were stripped naked and subjected to some form of medical or clinical experiment. And if you go to the next slide there, Christian, we'll talk through some of the slides. Now, at one point, Gary said, Malcolm, this is, and then he stopped. This is, no, talk to me, Gary. Tell me anything you can recall is vitally important, no matter how absurd it may sound. You gotta tell me. Well, I was lying on this flat table, maybe about 5-6 feet raised off this floor. I was in this room. It was devoid of anything. It was a kind of silver curved room with some strange lighting above me. And then suddenly I saw what appeared to be like a pool of gel, of like a man's shaving gel, a man would shave with, started bubbling up from the floor of this room. He says, and I couldn't move, Malcolm. I couldn't move a muscle lying there. I was completely naked. I was terrified. I could only move the eyes in my head. And I stared down at this little creature who came out came out of this bubbling effect. And I said in the drawing, this was an artist's rendition of a drawing. It's not the original drawing, of course, but this is a rendition of that. And I said, Gary, you've drawn what appears to be ribs on this creature. Do you think they were ribs? And he said quite an interesting thing, Christian. He says, no, I think possibly they were heavy folds of skin, which was quite interesting. If we go on to the next slide there. Colin found himself not on a flat raised table. He found himself encased in this like if you can imagine a cigar case. It's only about what, 7-8 inches long, but this was 8 feet tall, clear perspex or clear glass. He was inside of it, and he was sitting naked, and he was strapped to this chair, and he saw this device that you're looking at on screen just now. It came up from the floor and spun round. And at that point, he started to cry. And he could see, although he couldn't move, he could only move his eyes, excuse me, he could see to the left and to the right of him, similar structures, similar like big glass tubes. To the left and to the right, there were males, there were females, they were young and they were old, all next to him. And there was like a kind of mist, a pervading mist that was revolving around all these tube structures. If we go to the next slide. Okay, this one here. Yeah, that was the original drawing by Gary of this creature coming up from the wood. You saw the artist's illustration a moment ago. This is when I said to him, you know, is that ribs, Gary? He said, no, I think it's heavy folds of skin. And if you go into the next one again, Christian. Now, again, Gary's lying flat. This is a drawing done by Gary. He was lying flat on this bed, the structure, and suddenly this can-shaped device came up from the floor of this object, and this appendage that you've got to the left of this started to revolve round and round, and there was a small humming sound when it was revolving round. So we asked the question, you know, what could this be? You know, we obviously don't know, but it was doing some kind of purpose. And next slide, please. I should have sent you more photographs, Christian. Got tons of them. Now, this probably was the most dramatic, for want of a better word, drawing that Gary did in the whole recalling the experience. What you're looking at on screen here is the top part of the table that Gary's lying on. Again, he can't move. There's 2 of these creatures standing at the foot of this raised table, one of which, as you can see in the illustration there, is holding this diamond-shaped object, and it started moving up and down his body. And again, you could ask the question, well, what's going on here? And then Gary again at this point says, Malcolm, and I says, come on now, you got to tell me. He says, I can't. I says, you got to tell me what? Okay, to the left of me, Malcolm, sitting on the floor, was a naked female. She had her knees up under her chin. She had her arms around her knees, her legs, and she had kind of shaggy, perm, loose hair. And she gently turned and looked at me. And he says, Malcolm, the tears were running down her face. I'll never, never forget the desperation, the fear and desperation and solitude and loneliness that came out of that girl's face. And as you can see in the back to the bottom, top right, it was this very bright room. So, you know, under hypnosis, as I say, is it really happening? Did he really experience this, or did he conjure it up through a book? We can ask the question as we go through this chat this evening. If you go to the next slide there. Yeah, again, we've got Gary lying on this flat raised table, and he says, it was this, Malcolm, he says, it was a big lens-shaped device, and it was about 5 to 6 feet wide, 2.5 feet, you know, tall, and it was just undulating in the corner of this room, spinning about and undulating and moving slowly. And again, we ask the question, you know, what's going on here? If we truly are dealing with some form of alien intelligence, for want of a better word, who can understand what they have, their technology. If you had a caveman and took him into one of the new hospitals here in England and showed him all the machines, he'd go, what's this? He wouldn't comprehend it. So maybe whatever these devices were something akin to some futuristic technology. And if we go to the next one there, Christian. Yeah, again, Gary's lying down on this flat raised table. Now, we recorded on audio tape and videotape. We recorded most, not all, but most of these hypnotic regression sessions. And so what you're looking at here is a top view, looking down, a bird's eye view. And as Gary's talking about all these things, he says, suddenly the small, thin, grey arm just fell on my chest as I was lying there, Malcolm. And he actually came out of hypnosis because he saw that under hypnosis and he got such a fright that he came straight out of hypnosis. And actually, I got a fright as well because I wasn't expecting it, you know. And but yeah, that's what he saw. And next slide again. I don't know if I've not got that many. Yeah, that's the two guys. Colin Wright on your left there and Gary Wood on your right. Gary actually passed a BBC lie detector test, a professional test, some years after the event. Now, again, anybody, well, not anybody, most people can lie under a lie detector test. More so people who can, you know, manage their bodies, so to speak. They can calm themselves down. And some people are quite easy at telling even the wrong name. So we get back to the aspect of hypnosis. I took a lot of flack at the time for introducing the guys to hypnosis. They said in my latest book, they says, Malcolm, come what may, we were happy to do it. It's probably given them more questions than answers, to be fair. And something else I should tell your good self and your listeners and viewers is that Gary's wife never believed a word of her husband's story. Then one night, I received a phone call and I picked it up. Hello? Hi, this is, and I won't give her name, it was Gary's wife. And she said, last night, I was lying in my bed. Now, Gary was beside me. He was sleeping. I had just finished reading a book, Malcolm, closed the book, put the book on the bedside cabinet, switched off the light, and within 10 seconds, small, cold, clammy hands grabbed at my ankles and pulled me forcibly down the bed. I looked at the wall because there was a break in the curtains where the street lamp was pervading through the curtains, so there was sufficient light to illuminate part of the room. And she says, Malcolm, I saw 3 small grey beings. They couldn't believe that I could see them. They released my ankles and they just wobbled through the wall. And she says, Malcolm, I'm so sorry. I fully believe my husband now. Now, a good few years later, I'm trying to remember all this. There's so much in this case. A few years later, Gary says that he was driving up towards Gillane. It's another town in Scotland. And pretty similar kind of, fields on either side. And then suddenly, this bright white light came over the bonnet of his car, came through the windscreen and into the car and illuminated the whole car. Gary had his 2 young sons in the car at that time, and they were screaming their heads off. They were terrified. Thankfully, it only lasted a matter of 20 seconds or so. People might say, well, do you think he was abducted again, Malcolm? And we don't want to go there. He may have been, he may not have been, but clearly that's another case. And it's another special case in the annals of Scottish ufology. As I say, my book on that case will be out in a few months. And it's just one of these close proximity sightings. And we've got them as well in Scotland. Are you still there, Christian?
I'm still here. Sorry about that. I mute myself so you can't hear my cat in the background.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so let's move on to your book. Oh, no, we've got a picture of the...
Yeah,
the A70 where it happened. It's quite a lonely area, isn't it?
it is. I'm glad we put this up. If I had known, I could have done a proper lecture on this, but I just gave you some of the photographs. What you're looking at, people, is the blind bend. Now, if you can imagine, just at the top of that, there was this black structured object just sitting there. You know, obviously this is at night, it's dark, and it emitted the silver curtain shimmering mist that hit the car. And, you know, people may say, well, was that for them? Could it have been the next car coming down the road? We generally tend to find that people who have been abducted in, you know, previous years, probably when they were teenagers, etc. But yeah, an interesting case.
Was it on the tree side or on the other side on the blind bend? Do you know?
It was
Yeah.
just in the middle of the road, above the middle of the road. Yeah, just next to that tree. Just next to that tree. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it was hovering in the middle of the road, directly on the corner.
That's the one. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And here's the book, which is coming out. When's it due out?
Well, I just got the hard copy proof today. I've just checked it through and I couldn't see any mistakes. So I've told my publisher, right, go ahead. So fingers crossed, maybe in about a month's time, it'll be in Amazon. Yeah.
Excellent. And it's Amazon, not Lulu this time, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we'll be able to get that from amazon.co.uk. And if you are watching this subsequently on YouTube at some point in the future, it will probably be released by the time you see this. Okay. Well, and is this as long as the Dechmont Law book, or is this a shorter book?
This is probably the second biggest book that I've written. The biggest book that I've written was about Nessie, and that was about 538 pages. This one's 435, I think. So quite a big book.
I like the
Yeah.
cover. Actually, from what we just saw, you can see exactly where it was that they saw it. Fantastic.
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
So let's move on to the third case for tonight. And I promise that if it's okay with you, Malcolm, we'll have questions afterwards, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. How do you say this? Because I wouldn't be able to.
It's Craig Luscar. And it's a reservoir which is near Dunfermline in Fife. And again, we're looking at central Scotland. And the story behind this one was that the gentleman who is a photographer and also a painter went up to Craig Luscar Reservoir to paint the lovely scenery. And it was quiet, beautiful, out in the wilds, little bird song, perfect. And he set up his easel to paint from the reservoir. And so he's painting away. Then suddenly he heard a strange buzzing, humming sound coming from the area. And he went, well, maybe that's just the electricity pylons that cross across this part in the area. Because if you stand underneath a electricity pylon, you'll hear this resonant sound, very low humming sound. And he thought that's what it was. And then what happened next was that it got louder and louder and louder. He went, well, what is that? And he turned round. And this is the photograph you're looking at was sent over to Ground Saucer Watch in Phoenix, Arizona. It's not the original photograph. It's been digitized, etc. If we can keep going, flicking through, maybe we have the original there. I don't know if we do. Yeah, that's a close-up of the original. But on the original, at the bottom of the screen, you can clearly see the hillside, the hills, and the trees. So what you're looking at is, he couldn't believe it. He saw this hat-shaped object just sitting there in the air, and he knew straight away, as most witnesses do, that this wasn't, again, a conventional helicopter, an aircraft. This is, as I say, a good few years ago. And he was really, really annoyed because the top part was like a top hat. And when he took this photograph, it telescoped. It descended into the main body of the object and flew away. But before it did so, he says, Malcolm, he says, suddenly all the bird song dissipated. The low rumble of traffic on a nearby road about a quarter of a mile away, couldn't hear it. He says, Malcolm, it was like I was encased in one of those old Victorian bell jars, you know, where they put the stuffed animals in. It's like a big, something like that just came right over. I couldn't hear a thing. It was like Jenny Randall's calls it the Oz factor. It's just the witness, and that, witnessing whatever they're looking at. So this top part was, as I say, was like a top hat, telescoped in and shot away. He managed to get 2 photographs before it flew away. It was a wind-on camera, pre-digital, of course. And like I say, we sent the photographs over to a guy called Jeff Senio at GSW, and he said clearly, yeah, this is an object in excess of 30 feet. It's clearly flying. It's not a hubcap. It's not a discus. All we can say is it is a UFO, but it may have a natural explanation. Now, like any given UFO sighting, our society, we check with the police. Did any members of the public report seeing something in that area at the time? We check with the local airports, the national airports, the flying clubs, the discus plates, shooting, all that. We dot the I's and cross the T's and try very, very hard to get a natural explanation to any given UFO sighting before we even look at an alternative. And there weren't any alternatives. You know, nothing was flying in the air at that time. And I don't know if you've got another photograph there. It might just be a smaller rendition. Don't know. Yeah, so the guy is an artist as well. And as I say, he was there to paint, not photograph, but to paint the reservoir. So he drew this. He says, Malcolm, this is what it truly was like when I saw it. It was 2-tiered. The top part, as I say, was much, much taller. But I was so annoyed, Malcolm. I was so really annoyed that when I took that photograph, it just telescoped into the main body. And I just wished, Malcolm, that I had have captured it just as you see it like that in the drone. And again, it's another classic photograph case, yeah. We may have another one coming up, actually, the Pomont case. Oh, that's the original. That's the original. Thanks for showing that. Again, it looks, you know, I mean, it does look like a discus. It does. Of course it does. The skeptics will have a field day with this. I can only go with a witness testimony and thankfully a photograph. And like the witness, I just wish that we had seen that top part more, you know, like a top hat coming down. And we checked, as I say, we couldn't find any aircraft in the vicinity. And basically, when we went to the Daily Record newspaper, because we wanted to see if there may be any other members of the public had seen that, and it came away with one of those silly kind of headlines. And the witness quite rightly says, Malcolm, that's me done. I went, why? He says, look at the ridicule I'm getting here. And, you know, sadly, it had nothing more to do with it, quite rightly. The problem we have as researchers is when we go to the media, we're trying to seek other witnesses and stuff like that. And I've been, you know, ridiculed by the media many, many times. They promise you the world, and sadly, it's not what comes out. Sometimes it's maybe just the editor. You know, I've seen the story, perfect text. Then it goes to the newspaper main editor, and they went, "Oh, that's too good. Let's give it some salt and pepper and give it arms and legs." And when it comes out in the paper, it's nothing like it was in its original capacity. But we still got to do that as researchers, because we're just trying to get more and more people involved, you know. Yeah, this photograph you're looking at just now is called the Pomont Reservoir photograph, another reservoir. And funnily enough, in that A70 case, Christian, there was a reservoir maybe only about, what, 200-300 yards away from that road. So who knows what's going on. Okay, with this photograph, you're looking at the underside of what these guys claim is a UFO. Story behind this one. They were setting up the cameras to do some nighttime photography of the Grangemouth petrochemical plant, which is near Stirling. And then suddenly they became aware of this ball of light coming from the Ochil Hills, and it raced very quickly towards their location. And it was about 200-400 yards above them. Then it started to descend. It started to lower itself down upon these two startled witnesses. In fact, this photograph, the chap that took it, he actually had to bend over backwards to take the photograph. And this photograph, as I say, shows the underside of the object with this concave ring just below it as well. So we checked again with the airports, the police, nothing was in the area at that time. And it's just one of these perplexing photographs. I think we're running out of photographs here. Yeah, I mean, these are just some of the books. That's the latest one. It's about a family in Ireland who have been bothered by what's known as the Hat Man and shadow people and strange beings in our family home. The reason myself and I dare say some good members of ASSAP write books is to get these stories out. It's not for publicity for ourselves. It's to get all these stories out because there's somebody out there can say, you know what? I know exactly what you're talking about because it happened to me. We're trying to build a big jigsaw, and that's what the paranormal's like, effectively. You know, the pieces of this jigsaw all over Europe, etc. We're putting all together to see where we go. I initially was the biggest skeptic going, and I set out in 1979 to disprove the paranormal. And whilst, yes, a lot of it you can, a lot of it, the shady mediums, etc. For me personally, there's enough substance to convince me that we're dealing with a life after death, a continuity after physical material death. And it's not, you know, oxygen starvation to the brain, maybe in some cases, but certainly not them all. And I'm now of the belief that there is this, as I say, this other place to go. I do believe that we're dealing with some form of non-human intelligence that always has been with us. We see the rock drawings in Australia. We see this in Renaissance paintings, these strange craft, vimanas, etc. The big problem is, of course, why? If they truly are these alien craft coming or interdimensional craft coming from elsewhere, why the secrecy? Why they're not? So there must clearly be an agenda going on here. But the thing that alarms me the most, Christian, is the abductions. You know, either we're dealing with one big global psychosis of immense proportions, or we're talking something real here. And it just annoys me that they're still taking sperm and ova from males and females. Why are they doing that? They've been doing that for over 40, 50 years. And it just beggars belief that they're still doing that. And we don't have all the answers. That's a sad thing, you know. Yeah, this is the book. That's the book about the Irish family. They were bothered by this hat man just suddenly appearing in the corner of their room and menacingly, you know, just staring at them. They had all these small greys in the house as well. It's way too much to really go into just now, but it's quite a horrifying, terrifying, true tale of the, you know, being molested in bed, getting scratched by nothing, and seeing things at other people's houses as well. So it's quite an interesting case, that one.
I would just like to deny categorically that I am the Hat Man. Despite the hat. Yes. I only referred to the Hat Man through my nephew, actually. He's much more up on this than that. I'm not sure if he's here tonight, Pierre, or not. But, well, thank you very much indeed, Malcolm. Now, tell us a bit more about SPI. You're still active. Who else is in SPI these days? Is Nick Kyle part of your group, or is that somebody else?
Yeah, Nick Kyle's obviously part of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research. And we have the lovely Alison Dunlop in our group. We have Ron Halliday, another good Scottish researcher. We have Ian Shanes, and we've got a number of researchers both in Scotland, England and Ireland. And since 1979, as I say, our main aims is to collect, research and publish accounts relating to most aspects of strange phenomena. And the bottom line is to purposely endeavour to come up with some answers to account for what at present eludes us. So